She was standing in the doorway of the small estate chapel in a tailored black suit, and a single low patent heel I could see at the threshold. And the registrar's fountain pen was open in her left hand. I was 26, the last living grandchild of a family that had owned 1,000 acres of North Yorkshire since 1796 and could not pay the £4 million inheritance bill that was due to the Crown by the 1st of April. And the woman in the chapel doorway was the woman my grandmother had spent a year of letters arranging to be my husband on paper. Her name was Sloane. She was 37.
Welcome, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
She lived in a small flat in Marylebone and a smaller one near Edinburgh. She was a financial strategist of a specialism so narrow that I had not been told it had a name until the lawyer had said it across the long oak table in the library 4 days before. And she had walked the gravel up to the front door of Larkwood Park on a Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock with a single black case in her hand and stepped out of the back of a black Bentley in a tailored black suit and low patent heels, and not a man, as the letterhead had said for 6 months, but a woman. She had not asked me to apologize for assuming. She had asked me 2 evenings later, in the library by the long window over the rose garden, with the Mont Blanc pen turned slowly between her right thumb and her right first 2 fingers, the way certain people turn a pen when they have not finished the thought that the pen has been writing. A single question, then say it like a yes. I spent the next 3 weeks living inside those 6 words. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. I want to back up first. My grandfather died in the 2nd week of January of the year I turned 26. He died in the small bedroom on the south side of Larkwood Park that he had moved into the year my grandmother could no longer bear the cold of the master bedroom, with my grandmother holding his right hand and Mrs. Bridie holding his left. And his last sentence to my grandmother, by Mrs. Bridie's account, which I believe was, "Ada, do not let her sell the orchard." Larkwood Park is a house and a chapel, and 3 barns and a granary and a walled rose garden, and a yew avenue, and an orchard of 93 trees, and a stretch of moor that goes up to a stone wall the family laid in 1798. And it has been ours since the Lascelles family settled it under a name we had not yet earned. And it has been almost not ours since the Second War. And after my grandfather died on the 14th of January, the small letter from the Inland Revenue arrived in the 3rd week of February. And the inheritance tax due on the estate was £4,200,000. And we had until the 1st of April to find it. And my grandmother had spent the year before my grandfather's death, without telling me, arranging the only legal financial structure in England that would let us keep the house and the orchard and the moor without selling the Vanessa Bell in the small drawing room. The structure has a name. I had not heard the name until the lawyer told me. The lawyer is a small, careful man called Mr. Easman, who has done the family's work since my grandfather was 40. He came up from London on the 2nd Sunday in February with a black document case and a brown wool overcoat, and he sat in the library with my grandmother and me, and he explained the structure to us at 5 in the afternoon over a single pot of tea that Mrs. Bridie had brought in without asking. The structure is a marriage, not a marriage of love, a marriage of capital. There is a small clause in the inheritance tax law that exempts the transfer of assets between spouses, and there is a small private network of women and men in London who specialize in entering into such marriages on a strictly contractual basis for landed families whose estates would otherwise pass to the Crown. The arrangement is paid for. It runs for a fixed term, usually 3 or 5 years. The spouse provides not only the legal name on the document, but, in many cases, the capital reorganization of the estate's finances during the years of the marriage, which is the part that actually saves the house. The marriage is dissolved at the end of the term by amicable consent. The spouse takes a fee, the estate stays in the family, the Inland Revenue gets a fraction of what it would have got. The arrangement is, Mr. Easman said, the way half the old houses in this country have been kept in their families since 1965. And it is a thing nobody talks about. And it is a thing you have to be inside a very small number of letters and conversations to be offered. And my grandmother had begun the conversations a year and a half ago. The strategist she had chosen was a person called S. Devereux. The letters in the document case said S. Devereux had been recommended by a Lady Furness, whose estate near Hexham had been saved by the same strategist in 2018. The letters said Mr. My grandmother had used the word he in every conversation we had ever had about the arrangement, and I had not asked, because I had been 26 and tired, and the orchard had been in my grandfather's last sentence, and I had been doing the only thing the careful version of me knew how to do, which was to not ask the questions whose answers I could not change. Mr. Devereux had agreed to a 3-year arrangement at a fee that the estate could afford on the condition that the financial reorganization of the estate's investment portfolio was put entirely under Mr. Devereux's direction for the term of the marriage. Mr. Easman said the terms were unusually generous to the estate and unusually demanding of the strategist. He said it was, in his quiet legal opinion, the best terms he had seen offered to an estate in 20 years. He did not say why. I did not ask. The wedding was set for the first Wednesday of March. The arrival of the strategist was set for the previous Wednesday, the 22nd of February, at 3 in the afternoon at the front of the house. I want to be honest about what I did with the 8 days between the lawyer's visit and the strategist's arrival. I worked. I am 26, and I am a textile conservator at the Tate, by which I mean I work in the small back rooms of the gallery on the canvases, and the embroideries and the bound paper portfolios that nobody is going to look at in this lifetime. And I am very good at my work. In the careful, private way, I am good at the things I am good at. I took my 8 days off without explanation. I came up to Yorkshire on the 17th on the 4:12 from King's Cross, and I let Mrs. Bridie cry quietly into my coat in the hall when she met me, and I sat with my grandmother in the small bedroom on the south side for the first 3 days, and I held her left hand, the hand the housekeeper had held while my grandfather had died, and we talked about the orchard and about my mother, and about 3 of the things my grandfather had said in his last week. We did not talk about the marriage. My grandmother told me on the 4th day, on the Sunday afternoon, that the strategist would be arriving in the middle of the next week, and she said, "Iris, I want you to open the door for him yourself. Mrs. Bridie will be in the kitchen. I have asked her not to come out. I want you to be the first face he sees of this house." I said, "Yes, grandmother." She said, "He is a careful person. I have chosen him with as much care as I chose Walter 48 years ago. He will not embarrass you. He will not make you do a thing you do not want to do. He has a single condition for the arrangement, which is that he will live in this house for the 3 years of the term in the small east guest room, and that he will eat with you at the kitchen table when you are here and at the library desk when you are not, because he believes a marriage that is not seen in the rhythms of a house cannot save a house. I have agreed to the condition. I think you will too when you have met him." I said, "Yes, grandmother." I said yes because she was 81 and tired, and because the orchard had been in my grandfather's last sentence, and because I had spent 8 days in the small bedroom on the south side, and because I had spent the previous 6 months reading my grandmother's careful letters in Mr. Easman's document case. Mr. Easman had given me a copy of the bound folder of the correspondence, because the lawyer believed I had a right to read it before I signed anything. And the letters were the letters of a woman who had chosen her last great act on the estate, with the care she had brought to the cataloging of the rose garden in 1972. And I trusted her judgment in a way I had not yet decided I trusted my own. I did not look closely at the photograph of the strategist. There was a small black and white photograph in the document case, a head and shoulders, the kind a discreet professional puts on the front of a private resume. The photograph showed a person in a charcoal suit and a black shirt, with the collar standing slightly open, and short, dark blonde hair cropped close at the back, and the sharp, economical jaw of a person who did not waste a movement. And I had looked at the photograph for perhaps 4 seconds when Mr. Easman had first opened the case, and I had registered, in the small, careful way I registered things, that the person in the photograph could have been a man or could have been a woman, and that I would not have known from the photograph, and that I would find out on the 22nd when the door opened. I had decided in the same 4 seconds that the question of which it was did not matter to me as much as I had thought it might. I am being honest. I closed the folder. I drank my tea. I did not look at the photograph again. The 22nd of February was a Wednesday. The morning was clear. The slate was warm under the chapel roof. I was in the small east guest room at noon, putting the third clean sheet on the bed that the strategist would sleep in for 3 years, and I was thinking about the orchard. Mrs. Bridie was in the kitchen, putting cold roast pheasant and bread and good butter on the long oak table for tea at 4, because the strategist had written that he would have eaten on the road and would prefer a late tea over a formal supper on the first evening, and Mrs. Bridie had liked the letter and had said so. My grandmother was in the south bedroom with her 2 pillows up against the long window, so she could see the gravel of the front drive from her bed. She had not been downstairs in 8 days. She had asked me, that morning, to wear my grandmother Margaret's small emerald ring on the smallest finger of my right hand for the meeting. I had not worn the ring since the funeral. I had taken it out of the small velvet box at 1:30 when I was ready, and I had slid it on. The stone was warm against my finger by 2:30. The Bentley turned in at the gatepost at 3 minutes to 3. I heard the wheels on the gravel before I saw the car. I was standing at the foot of the main stair under the long portrait of my great-great-great-grandfather, who built the chapel in 1841, and I had my hands folded in front of me in the polite way Mrs. Bridie had taught me to fold them when I was 8, and meeting a visitor for the first time. The car came up the long drive at the slow, careful speed of a car that had not been to the house before, and it crossed the small bridge over the stream at the bottom of the rose garden, and it crested the small rise, and it pulled up in front of the door at 1 minute to 3. The driver was an older man in a quiet gray suit. He got out. He went to the rear right-hand passenger door. He opened it. He did not say anything. The person who stepped out of the back of the Bentley wore a tailored black wool single-breasted suit, cut in the close English style of a person who has had her suits made by the same Mayfair tailor for 15 years, with a slim leather belt and a black silk shirt buttoned to the throat and no necktie, and a single small gold cufflink at the left wrist that caught the cold winter sun once as she set her foot on the gravel. And she wore, and this is the thing the title of this story turns on, and the thing that took the 4-second registration in my mind that I had practiced on the photograph 8 days before, and turned it in a single afternoon into a different kind of decision, a pair of low patent leather heels. She set the first heel on the gravel. She set the second heel on the gravel beside it. She took the small black case from the driver. She thanked the driver in a voice so quiet I did not hear it from the door. The driver got back into the car, and the car turned and went back down the drive, in the careful, slow way a car turns at the front of a country house, when the driver knows the gravel is loose, and the woman in the tailored black suit and the low patent heels walked the 7 steps from the bottom of the front portico up to the door at the top, in a movement so economical that I could not look away from it, and she stopped 1 step below the threshold, with her case in her left hand, and she looked up at me at the door, with the cold winter light at the side of her face, and she said, in a low voice that did not announce itself, "Hello, Iris. I am Sloane Devereaux. Your grandmother and I have been writing for a year. She told me you would be the one to open the door. I want to tell you the truth about the next 10 seconds. The truth is that I had 4 sensations in my chest in that 10-second silence, and I have looked at them honestly since, and I will tell you all 4, because they are the 4 things that decided what the next 3 weeks were going to be. The first sensation was the recognition that the woman in front of me had been a woman in the photograph. I had known 4 seconds at the document case, and I had not let myself know I had known. I had pretended to myself that I had not been able to tell. The reason I had pretended is the second sensation. The second sensation was relief. Not the small ordinary kind, the deep slow kind that the body knows before the head does. I had spent 8 days quietly afraid that I was about to spend 3 years in the small East guest room, with a careful, well-meaning Englishman, with whom I would never be the daughter of myself that I had not yet been with anyone. And the woman at the foot of the steps in the tailored suit and the low heels was the answer to a question I had not asked aloud in 26 years. The third sensation was the realization that my grandmother had known. She had used the word he in every conversation we had ever had about the marriage. She had let Mr. Easman use the word he. She had let the letterhead say Mr. The letterhead I would learn from Mrs. Bridie 6 days later, when Mrs. Bridie finally agreed to tell me, had been my grandmother's idea, and not Sloane's. My grandmother had asked Sloane, in the 4th letter of their year of correspondence, whether Sloane would object to being referred to as Mr. Devereux in any external correspondence about the arrangement until the day of the arrival. And that the granddaughter, me, be told the truth by Sloane herself on the day she arrived, and not by anyone before. My grandmother had agreed. The agreement had held. The letterhead had said Mr. for 6 months. Sloane had stepped out of the Bentley in low heels and had said, "Hello, Iris, I am Sloane Devereux." My grandmother and I have been writing for a year. The third sensation, slower than the first two, was that the woman who had spent the last year of her life in the small bedroom on the south side waiting to die had chosen, with the care she had brought to the cataloging of the Rose Garden in 1972, the only suitor in England who was going to give me, in addition to a saved estate, an answer to the question I had not been brave enough to ask her in the 8 days I had been holding her left hand. The fourth sensation was that I was going to spend the next 3 weeks not letting Sloane Devereux know that the third sensation had happened. I am being honest. I had spent 8 days in the south bedroom, and I had not had the conversation with my grandmother that I now would not have, because she was 81 and tired, and her last sentence had been about the orchard. And I was not going to make her last great act of love into a transaction that she had to negotiate with me on top of everything else. I was going to spend the 3 weeks before the wedding being a careful tenant in my own house alongside the woman my grandmother had brought into it. And at the end of the 3 weeks, I was going to sign the marriage register with my own pen. And I was going to do it for the orchard. And I was not going to make Sloane Devereux pay, in the form of an obligation she had not signed up for the relief that had moved through my chest in the second sensation. I stepped down from the threshold. I held out my right hand. The emerald caught the cold winter sun. I said, "Welcome to Larkwood, Ms. Devereux." She did not flinch at the Ms. She took my hand in her own. Her hand was cold from the car. The gold cufflink at her left wrist sat exactly where the line of her sleeve ended, the way the cufflink of a woman who has had her suit cut by a careful tailor sits. And she shook my hand once, with the small economical pressure of a person who does not waste a movement, and she let it go. She said, "Thank you. May I come in?" I said yes. "Mrs. Bridie has tea at 4. My grandmother is in the south bedroom and would like to see you at 4:30 if that is convenient." She said, "Yes, that is convenient." She walked past me into the hall. She did not look around the hall. She had the discipline of a person who had walked into a great many halls in her career and had learned, somewhere along the way, that you do not let a hall do its work on you in the first 30 seconds. She set her case at the foot of the main stair. She did not take her shoes off. She turned to me. She said, "Iris, I want to say 2 things in the next 60 seconds, because I want them said before tea and before I see your grandmother, and then I will not say them again unless you ask me to." I said, "Please." She said, "The first thing is that I am sorry for the letterhead. Your grandmother asked me. I agreed. I would not have asked you to find out the way you did, but it was the way your grandmother chose, and her reasons were her own, and I am only going to apologize for it once, today, here, at the foot of this stair before we go on with the arrangement." I said, "You do not need to apologize. I knew at the photograph. I have known for 8 days. I had not let myself know." She said, "Then I am not apologizing for that." I said, "No." She said, "The second thing is the harder one. It is the thing your grandmother and I agreed I would say to you on the first day. The arrangement is a contract. I am here to save your house. I am here to put £4,200,000 of capital reorganization into your estate's portfolio across the next 3 years, in a way that will keep your orchard and your moor and your Vanessa Bell where they belong. I am here in the legal language as your wife. I am not here as your wife in any other language. The contract has been written carefully to make that clear." I will live in the small east guest room for 3 years. I will eat at this table with you when you are at this house. I will not enter any room you do not invite me into. I will not ask any question you do not invite. At the end of 3 years, the contract will dissolve and I will leave, and the estate will be yours. And you and I will not see each other again unless you choose, at any point in those 3 years or after, to make that choice. That is the contract. Your grandmother understood it. She wrote me a letter 4 months ago in which she said that she was telling you nothing about me beyond the legal arrangement, because the only thing she wanted to give you alongside the saved house was the freedom to meet a stranger in your own hall without an instruction about what to do with her. I am here on those terms. Do you understand? I said, yes. She said, good. She did not say anything else. Mrs. Bridie came out of the kitchen at 4 with a tray. Sloane took her coat off in the hall and hung it on the second hook on the row of hooks beside the door. Not the first hook, because the first hook had been my grandfather's and was empty, and she had noticed. She walked into the kitchen behind Mrs. Bridie. She sat at the long oak table. She drank her tea, which was lapsang souchong, the way she had asked for it in the small, careful letter she had sent to Mrs. Bridie 10 days before about her preferences, with no sugar and a little milk, and she ate 1 slice of bread with butter and 1 slice of cold pheasant, and she said the words good and thank you and well to Mrs. Bridie in the right places. And Mrs. Bridie cried quietly in the corner of the kitchen for 30 seconds when she thought neither of us was looking, because Mrs. Bridie had been the housekeeper of Larkwood for 41 years, and she had loved my grandmother for 39 of them, and she had spent the last year of her life knowing the choice my grandmother had made, and the choice had walked into the kitchen at 4 and had asked for lapsang with milk, and had not raised her voice once. At 4:30, Sloane stood up. She thanked Mrs. Bridie. She walked up the back stair to the south bedroom, and she shut the door behind her. She was with my grandmother for 61 minutes. I waited in the library with Mrs. Bridie. We did not speak. Mrs. Bridie washed the same teapot twice. I added one thing to my list, although I did not yet know I was keeping a list. The thing I added, in the small leather notebook I had taken out of my coat pocket without thinking, was, she hung her coat on the second hook. I want to tell you what my grandmother said to Sloane in the south bedroom in those 61 minutes. I learned the entire conversation, sentence by sentence, 6 months later, in October, when my grandmother had died, and Sloane was on her way back to Edinburgh for a Sunday, and she sat with me at the kitchen table on the Saturday night before she left. And she told me, because she had asked my grandmother on the 7th day of the marriage, whether she might tell me one day. And my grandmother had said, when she has said your name in the small chapel in March, and not before, and after that, Sloane, you may tell her any conversation we have ever had. So Sloane did not tell me in February. She did not tell me in March. She told me in the kitchen in October, after the wedding and the 3 weeks. And what I will tell you here is the small, careful version, because the long version is between the two of them and is not mine to give. My grandmother had thanked Sloane for coming. She had asked Sloane about the drive. She had asked Sloane about the small flat in Marylebone, and about the smaller one near Edinburgh, and about the older woman called Frances, who had been Sloane's tailor's wife for 15 years and who had taught Sloane, at 21, what kind of woman Sloane had been all along. My grandmother had told Sloane that she had been a girl in North Yorkshire in 1944 who had not had a word for what she had felt at 15 for a friend of her mother's named Sybil, and that she had married my grandfather Walter at 23 in the same small chapel I was about to be married in, and that she had loved him for 48 years, and that she had also, separately, in a quieter chamber of her heart that she had never let into the kitchen of her life, loved Sybil at 15 and a French woman called Helene at 32, who had taught at the local school for a year and a half and then gone home, and that she had decided, late in her life, in the small bedroom on the south side, that the last great act of love she would do for her granddaughter would be to find a person who could save the estate, And also, separately, in a quieter chamber of her own consideration, give the granddaughter the chance to ask the question. Her grandmother had not asked at 15. My grandmother had said, "I have chosen you. I have read everything Lady Furness sent me. I have read your letters. I have read your tailor's wife's letters. I trust you. I do not require you to be anything more than the strategist of this estate for 3 years. I only ask that you be careful with Iris, in the way I would be careful if I were 40 years younger and had a chance to begin again. She is the last of us. Take care of the house. Take care of her if she ever asks. Do not take care of her if she does not." Sloane had said, "Yes, Lady Lascelles." My grandmother had said, "Ada, I will be dead in 7 months. Use my name while I have it." Sloane had said, "Yes, Ada." My grandmother had said, "Good." She had given Sloane, at the end of the 61 minutes, a single object. It was the small gold cufflink that had belonged to my great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother, which my grandmother had worn, set as a brooch at her throat on the day she had married my grandfather 48 years before. She gave the cufflink to Sloane. She said, "Wear it on the day, not before. Bring it back to me after, if I am still here. If I am not here, give it to Iris." Sloane had taken it. Sloane had wept once, very quietly, in the chair at the side of the bed. In the small private way Sloane wept across the year I came to know her, by setting the back of her hand against her own jaw for 1 count, and not letting any sound out. She put the cufflink in the small leather case she kept in the inside pocket of her jacket. She came down the back stair at 5:30. She did not say anything to me about the conversation in the south bedroom. She did not need to. I had spent the hour in the library reading the pages of the bound folder I had not let myself read closely, and I had read, in my grandmother's hand, in the 11th of the 17 letters in the folder, the sentence, "Mr. Devereux, I am writing to you today because I have been a careful woman for 80 years, and I have only one piece of careful work left in me, and I would like to spend it on my granddaughter Iris, who is 25 years old and is, I believe, although she has not told me, a person who has not had the conversation with me she would have had if she had been born in a different year. If you can help me save the estate, and also help her be in a house with a woman who has been the woman she is, for longer than my granddaughter has known the woman she might be, I will be in your debt for the small remaining piece of my life, and well into whatever comes after." I closed the folder. I did not cry. I sat at the long walnut desk in the library for 30 minutes, with my hand on the closed folder, and I thought about my grandmother, and about my grandfather's last sentence about the orchard, and about the woman who had hung her coat on the second hook, and had asked for lapsang with milk. And I made the same decision I had made on the threshold of the door at 3 o'clock, only now with the second sensation given a careful place to sit. I was going to spend the 3 weeks before the wedding being a careful tenant in my own house alongside the woman my grandmother had brought into it. I was going to sign the register on the first Wednesday of March with my own pen. I was going to do it for the orchard. I was not going to make my grandmother's last act of love a transaction Sloane had to carry alongside the contract. I closed the library door. I went up the back stair to my own bedroom on the first floor, at the south end of the house, the bedroom I had slept in since I was 9, and I sat at the small writing desk, and I wrote, in the small leather notebook, the second thing on the list. She wept once, by setting the back of her hand against her jaw. I had not known I was keeping a list. I closed the notebook. I put it in the drawer of the desk. I went to bed at 10:30. I did not sleep. I want to tell you the shape of the 3 weeks. In the same honest way I will tell you the shape of the chapel on the last Wednesday. Because the 3 weeks are not the chapel and the chapel is not the 3 weeks. But the chapel is not possible without the 3 weeks. And the 3 weeks were the careful long shape of 2 people who had agreed, without agreeing, that they were going to do nothing about what was changing between them, and who were doing it for 2 opposite reasons. Sloane worked at the long walnut desk in the library from 7 in the morning until 12, and from 1 until 4 every weekday and on Saturday mornings, for the 3 weeks. She worked on the estate's portfolio. She worked through every paper my grandfather had filed since 1981, and every paper the previous land agent had filed since 1996, and every paper my grandmother had set aside in the small wooden box on the side of the library fireplace that nobody had been brave enough to read. She made 3 telephone calls in the first week to bankers in London, and 1 in the second week to a private foundation in Edinburgh that I did not ask her about, and she negotiated, in the careful clipped voice she used when she was working, the structure of the capital reorganization that was going to keep the orchard in the family. She did not tell me the details of the calls. She did not need to. I trusted her. I worked. I had brought up from London the small commission I was carrying for the Tade, which was the restoration of a 15th century altar cloth that had been damaged in a small fire in a Suffolk church in 2019, and I worked on the cloth at the long table in the conservatory at the back of the house, in the cold, low northern light of February that the conservatory has even with the heating on. I worked on the cloth from 9 to 12, and from 1 to 5, and from 7 to 9 on the weekdays. And I worked through the long Sunday afternoons, because I had 8 days of leave, and I had spent them, and the cloth was due back in London on the 18th of March. I did not stop working on the cloth for the wedding. The cloth was the careful, private thing I had on my hands. Mrs. Bridie cooked. Mrs. Bridie made lunch for the 3 of us at the long oak table at 12:30 every weekday. Mrs. Bridie made dinner at 7 on the long oak table for the 3 of us every weekday. Mrs. Bridie took up a small tray to the south bedroom for my grandmother 3 times a day, and she sat with my grandmother for the long part of each afternoon, because the doctor came on Mondays and Thursdays, and the rest of the time was Mrs. Bridie. My grandmother did not come downstairs in the 3 weeks. She did not need to. She had said the things she needed to say. Sloane and I ate at the long oak table for 3 meals a day for 14 days, and we did not speak for more than 5 minutes at any meal. I am being honest. We were both careful people. We had both spent our careers being careful people. Sloane did not ask questions. I did not offer answers. Mrs. Bridie filled the small, honest space at the head of the table with the small, honest things Mrs. Bridie had been filling the table with for 41 years, and I added one thing to my list across the first week. The first thing I added was that Sloane always set down her saucer with the small chip in the rim toward herself, away from me. Mrs. Bridie had 4 saucers of the old willow pattern that had small chips in the rim, from the kitchen of 41 years, and she put them out at every meal because she had stopped sending them away to be repaired in 1996, when she had decided that the small chips were the honest part of the household. Sloane had noticed the chips at the first lunch on the second day. From the second lunch onwards, she set her saucer down so the chip was toward her own side of the table, away from me, and she did this every time, without comment, without looking down at the saucer, in the same way she did everything, evenly, without waste. I noticed on the 4th day. I added it to the list. The second thing I added was that Sloane did not take her shoes off in the entry hall. She took them off at the foot of the main stair, in the small alcove under the long portrait, where my grandmother had taken her own shoes off for 60 years, because the entry hall was cold under stocking feet, and the small alcove was warm from the small stove. Sloane had not been told. She had watched, on the first evening, where my grandmother's house slippers were kept, and she had moved her own quiet leather flats to the same spot beside them, and from the second morning she put her low heels in the same spot, and she walked the rest of the house in her stocking feet. The low heels stayed in the alcove. I added the second thing to the list on the 3rd day. The 3rd thing I added was about the cufflink. Sloane wore a single small gold cufflink on the left wrist of every shirt she wore in the 3 weeks, not the right wrist. Only the left. The right cuff she wore plain, with a small black cloth-covered button. I noticed on the 4th day, in the kitchen, when she set her right hand down on the table beside her cup, and the right cuff was buttoned, and the left cuff caught the lamp once on the back of her hand. I noticed because the cufflink had not been in the photograph, and it had been there when she had stepped out of the Bentley. I noticed because the cufflink was not the cufflink my grandmother had given her in the south bedroom on the first afternoon. My grandmother's cufflink was wrapped in a small piece of tissue in Sloane's leather case in her room, and would not be on her wrist until the chapel, but a cufflink of her own. I added it to the list. I did not know yet whose cufflink it had been. The fourth thing was Mrs. Bridie. Mrs. Bridie told me on the 7th day at the back step at 4:30 when she was putting the empty butter dish out for the kitchen cat. Mrs. Bridie said, "Iris, Sloane Devereaux is the most careful woman who has been in this house since your grandmother Ada was 30. I have made her 3 meals a day for a week. She has not asked for one thing. She has not raised her voice once. She has put her saucer down with the chip toward herself. She has hung her coat on the second hook. She has taken her shoes off at the alcove. She has read your grandmother's letters aloud at the bedside without comment. She has not gone into a single room of this house that she has not been invited into. Your grandmother chose her. I am telling you, the temperature of the house has changed. I am not telling you what to do about it. I am telling you, because I am 64 and I have known your grandmother for 41 years, and I will know you for the next 20, and I will not lie to you while she dies upstairs." I said, "Mrs. Bridie." Mrs. Bridie said, "Iris, go in and finish your altar cloth. I am putting the butter out." I went in. I sat at the conservatory table. I did not lift the needle for 40 minutes. I added the fourth thing to the list, in pencil, in a hand that was not quite steady, and the fourth thing was, Mrs. Bridie is keeping the kitchen warm for a wedding. I want to tell you the rest of the list. I will not tell you each thing in a new paragraph. I have already done that with a list before, in another house in another year. And the shape of that list is not the shape of this one. I will tell you the rest in a single careful paragraph because the rest of the list arrived in a single careful blur across the second week of the 3. She read my grandmother's letters aloud at the bedside in the afternoons, without comment, in the low, even voice she used at the long walnut desk. She read the entire bound folder over the second week, from the first letter to the 17th, and she did not skip the 11th letter when she came to it. And my grandmother listened with her eyes closed, and Mrs. Bridie sat in the chair at the foot of the bed with her hands folded in her lap. She walked the orchard with the land agent on the 3rd Tuesday, in her tailored black coat over the tailored black suit, in the low patent heels. And the land agent told me at dinner that evening that he had been Sloane's land agent for 30 seconds before he had been ours, because she had asked him 3 questions about the 93 trees that he had not known the answers to, and she had not made him feel small about it, and that he was going to walk every tree with her in the next 2 weeks and tell her the things he should have told my grandfather in 2014. And would I sit in on the conversations? Because she had asked him to invite me. She closed the library door behind her without sound, every time. She poured her own tea last at every meal after Mrs. Bridie and after me. She did not sign any document that did not need my name first on it, even when she was within her contractual right to sign without me, because she had decided on the first day that no piece of paper would leave Larkwood Park about Larkwood Park without the signature of the granddaughter on it before the signature of the strategist. She used Mrs. Bridie's first name from the 4th day because Mrs. Bridie had told her on the 4th morning that her first name was Bridget and that she had been called Bridie since she was 3 and that Sloane was welcome to either. She used Bridie. She did not use Iris until the 11th day. When she used Iris on the 11th day, she used it in a sentence that was strictly professional, about a paper she had set on the long walnut desk for me to read. And I had felt the sentence the way you feel a small weight settle in a room. She wept once more in the 3 weeks, on the night of the 16th, when the doctor had been to the south bedroom for a long 40 minutes and had come down and had said quietly to me in the entry hall that my grandmother had perhaps 6 to 8 weeks and not the 7 months she had been telling herself. Sloane was in the kitchen with Mrs. Bridie when the doctor said it. I did not tell Sloane. I went into the library at 9. Sloane was at the long walnut desk in the low lamp with the papers of the third banking call from London open in front of her, and the small leather case at her left elbow. She did not look up when I came in. She finished the line she was writing. She set the Mont Blanc down. She looked up. She said, "How is your grandmother?" I said, "The doctor has revised the estimate. 6 to 8 weeks, not 7 months." She did not say anything for a count of 3. She set the back of her right hand against her own jaw for 1 count, the way she had set her hand against her jaw at the side of my grandmother's bed on the first afternoon, and she did not let any sound out. But I saw the small wet shine at the corner of her left eye for half a second before she closed the eye and opened it again. She said, "Thank you for telling me." I said, "You did not have to ask her to use her name." She said, "She offered." I said, "You wept." She said, "I did." I said, "I am sorry." She said, "Don't apologize. She has earned weeping." Then she said, "Iris, sit down for a moment if you can." I sat down across from her at the long walnut desk for the first time in 2 weeks. The fire was at the grate. The small stove behind her was making the small sound it makes after midnight. The Mont Blanc was capped on the blotter between us. She did not pick it up. She folded her hands. She said, "I am going to ask you a thing I would not be asking if she had 7 months. I would not have asked it for 3 years if it had been 3 years. I am asking it now because she has 8 weeks, and because it has changed what I should do with the next 3 weeks." I said, "Ask it." She said, "On the first day in the hall, I said the contract was the contract. I said I would live in the small East guest room for 3 years, and I would eat at this table when you were here, and I would not enter a room you did not invite me into, and I would not ask a question you did not invite. I am asking you only once in this room tonight with her sleeping upstairs, whether the contract that we are going to sign on Wednesday is the contract you would like to sign with me. I am not asking you to answer me tonight. I am not asking you to answer me before the wedding. I am asking you to know that you can answer me at any point in the next 3 years with 1 sentence, and I will hear it. The sentence is yours. I am not going to ask the question again. I am only telling you the question is open on a single condition, which is that if you ever do answer it, I am going to ask you to answer it like a yes and not like a contract. Do you understand?" I did not say anything for a count of 7. I touched my grandmother's emerald on the smallest finger of my right hand. I looked at the cufflink at her left wrist, not my grandmother's cufflink, the small private cufflink of her own that I had not yet known whose it had been. And I looked at her face, which was not asking me for anything, and I understood in the slow, careful way I understood things, that she was a woman who had spent a year of letters with my grandmother and a week and a half of meals in my kitchen, and that the question she had just asked me had not been a question she had brought into the house. The question had grown in the house. I understood, in the same slow way, that I had grown it too. I said, "I understand." She said, "Good." She picked up the Mont Blanc. She finished the line she had been writing. She did not look up at me again. I stood up. I went to the door. At the door I turned. I said in the voice I had not used in 2 weeks, "Good night, Sloane." She did not look up. She said, "Good night, Iris." It was the first time I had used her first name in the house. It was the first time she had used my first name in a sentence that was not strictly professional. I went up the back stair. I sat at the small writing desk in my own bedroom on the south end of the first floor, and I took out the small leather notebook from the drawer, and I added the 11th thing on the list, although I did not yet call it a list. And I added the 11th thing in pencil in a hand that was not quite steady. She asked the question without asking it. I closed the notebook. I went to bed at 1:30. I did not sleep. I want to tell you about the 17th day, because the 17th day was the day my grandmother sent for both of us. Mrs. Bridie came up to the conservatory at 3:15. I had been on the altar cloth since 1. The cold, low northern light was on the table. Mrs. Bridie said, "Iris, your grandmother would like you and Sloane to come up at 4. She would like you to come up together. She has been awake since 1, and she has asked Mrs. Bridie at 1, at 2, and at 3 what the time was, and Mrs. Bridie thought I would like to know. I said, yes, Mrs. Bridie. Mrs. Bridie said, I will tell Sloane. She went down to the library. Sloane and I went up the back stair at 4. We did not speak on the back stair. We stopped at the door of the south bedroom. Sloane knocked. My grandmother said, come in. Sloane opened the door. I went in first. Sloane went in after me. Sloane closed the door behind us without sound. My grandmother was in the bed with the 2 pillows up against the long window. The window was open at the top by an inch. The smell of the cold rose garden was coming in. Her hair was down. She had her grandmother Margaret's emerald on the smallest finger of her own right hand. She had taken it back from me on the morning of the 3rd day, because she had said she wanted to wear it for the 8 weeks she had left, and I had taken it off in the small writing desk and given it back to her at her bedside and slid it onto her finger myself. She had her grandfather Walter's wedding band on her own left hand. She had the small piece of tissue paper from Sloane's leather case in her right hand on the coverlet, and the small gold cufflink, her own mother's cufflink, the one she had worn as a brooch at her throat at her own wedding in 1976, was sitting in the small piece of tissue paper unwrapped. She said, sit, both of you. We sat. Sloane sat in the chair at the side of the bed where she had sat every afternoon for 15 days. I sat in the low chair at the foot of the bed where I had sat with my grandfather in his last week. My grandmother said, Iris. I said, yes. She said, I am going to die in the next 8 weeks, possibly 6. I have known it since November. I have hidden it from no one in this room except the doctor, who only confirmed it on Tuesday. I am telling you now, properly, so you can hear it from me and not from him. I said, yes, grandmother. She said, I want you to be married in this house on Wednesday at noon in the chapel, and not, as we had planned, at the registry office in Thirsk on Wednesday at 2:30. I have asked Mr. Easman to arrange it. He has arranged it. The Reverend will be here at noon. Sloane is welcome to use any name on the document she wishes. She is welcome to use Mr. Easman's clerk as a second witness and to use Mrs. Bridie as the first witness who has asked for the honor, and I have given it to her, on the condition that she does not cry until after the signing. I am not going to come down to the chapel. I do not want any of you to argue with me about that. I will be at this window. The chapel is 50 yards from this window. I want you both to look up at this window once after the signing before you go back into the house. I will be at the window. I will not wave. I do not believe in waving from sickbeds. I will see you. That will be sufficient. I said, yes, grandmother. Sloane said, yes, Ada. My grandmother said, there is one more thing. It is the thing I have wanted to say for the longest. I'm going to say it now in front of Sloane because she has earned the right to hear it, and because I am not sure I will have the breath to say it tomorrow. Iris. I said, yes, grandmother. She said, I am sorry I did not ask you the question I should have asked you when you were 18. I have known the answer since you were 13. I did not have the vocabulary at 80 that I should have had at 60. I'm telling you now, because Sloane is sitting in the chair at the side of the bed, and the woman who has been in the chair at the side of the bed at the end of every careful woman's life in this country since 1944 is the woman she should have been allowed to bring into the chair while she was alive. I did not have her. You have her. I am asking you, not because I have a right to ask, but because I want to hear the answer from your own mouth before I die. Do you want this marriage to be the marriage on paper, or do you want it to be the marriage in your own name? I want to tell you what happened in the room in the 8 seconds after she said it. The window was open at the top by an inch. The cold rose garden air was on my cheek. Sloane had her right hand against the side of her own jaw, not in front of her mouth, by the side, the way she set her hand against her own jaw when she did not let any sound out, and her eyes were closed. My grandmother had her own eyes on me, the way the small eyes of a great person who is dying look at you when she has the breath for one more sentence. The emerald on her smallest finger caught the cold light once. I said, grandmother. She said, yes. I said, in my own name. She said, good. I touched my grandmother's left hand. She put her right hand over my left hand. She put her left hand over Sloane's right hand. She held the three of us across the coverlet for a long count of 14. Then she let go. She lay back. She said, "Now go. I have used my afternoon. Go and sit somewhere together. Do not sit here. Mrs. Bridie will sit with me. Mrs. Bridie has earned the chair for the rest of the day." We went out. Sloane closed the door behind us without sound. We did not speak on the back stair. We went into the library. Sloane went to the long walnut desk. She did not sit down. She stood at the window over the rose garden with her hands behind her back. I stood at the doorway. The fire was at the grate. The small stove behind the desk was ticking. The cold light was on the table. The small piece of tissue paper from the bedside was, I realized, in Sloane's left hand. She had picked it up off the coverlet on the way out, without my seeing her do it, and she had carried it down without saying. She turned. She held the small piece of tissue paper out to me. She said, "Will you put it on me on Wednesday?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Thank you." I crossed the room. I took the small piece of tissue paper. I took the small gold cufflink out of the tissue. I set it on the long walnut desk beside the Mont Blanc. I said, "Show me which sleeve." She held out her left wrist. I unbuttoned the small black cloth-covered button on her left cuff. I took the cufflink off her left wrist, her own private cufflink, the one I had been adding to the list for 2 weeks. I set her own cufflink on the desk beside the gold one. I picked up my grandmother's mother's small gold cufflink. I put it through the buttonhole at her left cuff. I closed it. I set her left wrist down gently. I did not let her hand go for a count of 3. I said, "Then say it like a yes." She said yes. I said, "Then say it like a yes." She said, "Yes, Iris." That was the entire size of the conversation in the library on the 17th day. I want to tell you about the chapel on the Wednesday, because the chapel is the only thing in this story I have not yet told you about. The chapel is the small stone chapel at the south end of the rose garden, 50 yards from the south bedroom window, with a single bell that has been silent since the bell rope broke in 1981, and a stone floor that is 220 years old, and a small black iron stove that Mrs. Bridie had lit at 6 in the morning. The Reverend was an old friend of my grandmother's, who had married my grandmother to my grandfather 48 years before. He was 83. He drove himself up from the village at 11:30 in a green Morris that should not have made the hill. He came in. He sat on the small wooden bench beside the stove with Mrs. Bridie until 10 to 12. He did not say much. He did not need to. I walked the 50 yards from the back door of the house to the chapel in my grandmother Margaret's small ivory wool coat that I had worn at my own confirmation when I was 13, and a soft cream wool dress under it, and my grandmother's emerald on the smallest finger of my right hand. I carried no flowers. Mrs. Bridie had cut a single white rose from the south wall of the rose garden, and she had pinned it to the lapel of Sloane's tailored black coat on the back step at 11:30, and Mrs. Bridie had cried for exactly the 4 seconds it took to pin it. And then she had stopped, the way she had promised my grandmother she would. Mrs. Bridie carried a small bound folder of the marriage papers and a small linen handkerchief, and the small leather case from Sloane's room with the second cufflink in it, in case I had not been able to put it on Sloane in the library on the 17th day, which I had been able to. The folder was for the Reverend. I went into the chapel at 5 to 12. The stove was on. The cold sun was through the small east window. Mr. Eastman's clerk was at the back, with his small leather case open on his knees, with the papers ready. Mr. Eastman was not there. Mr. Eastman had decided at 68 that he would not come to a wedding he had drafted the papers for, because he had been a careful man for 40 years, and he had a small private code about his place at weddings he had drafted papers for. Mrs. Bridie was at the front, on the south side. The Reverend was at the altar. Sloane was not in the chapel. I waited at the front. I did not turn around. I did not look at the south window of the house, although the window was visible through the small west window of the chapel. I held my hands folded in front of me in the way Mrs. Bridie had taught me to fold them when I was 8. I looked at the Reverend. The Reverend looked at me. We waited. She came at 1 minute past 12. I heard the small, careful footfall of the low patent heels on the stone path before I heard the door. The footfall was the same footfall as the gravel at 3 o'clock on the 22nd of February, only slower, with the small, careful pause between each step that a person makes when a person has decided to remember the walk to a chapel. The door opened. The cold winter sun came in for one count. The door closed. The footfall came up the aisle behind me. She stopped one step below the altar, on the south side, beside me, in the tailored black suit, and the low patent heels, and the cream silk shirt buttoned to the throat with no necktie, with the small white rose pinned to her lapel, and with my grandmother, Margaret's mother's small gold cufflink at her left wrist, where I had put it in the library on the 17th day. She looked at me. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The Reverend said, "Are we ready?" I said, "Yes." Sloane said, "The Reverend married us. He used the old form. He used the form he had used for my grandparents in 1976. He used the form that the Lascelles family chapel had used since 1841. He asked of me whether I took Sloane Devereux to be my lawfully wedded wife. I said I did. He asked of Sloane whether she took Iris Lascelles to be her lawfully wedded wife. She said she did. He asked us to sign the register. Mr. Eastman's clerk opened the long leather book on the small table at the south side. Sloane signed first. She used the Mont Blanc. She used her full name. She wrote Sloane Adele Devereux in the small, even hand I had been seeing for 3 weeks on the papers of the third banking call from London. I signed after her. I used my own pen, a small steel one my grandmother had given me for my 21st birthday. I wrote Iris Margaret Lascelles in my own hand. Mrs. Bridie signed as the first witness. The clerk signed as the second. The Reverend said, "By the law of England and by the long custom of this chapel, you are married." Sloane turned to me. She did not lift her hands. She said, in a low voice that did not announce itself, in the same low voice she had used on the bottom step at 3 o'clock on the 22nd of February, "Then say it like a yes." I said, "Yes." She said, "Then say it like a yes." I said, "Yes, Sloane." She lifted her right hand. She set the back of her fingers very lightly against my jaw. She kissed me, the way she did everything, evenly, without waste, with the small, surprising precision she brought to her work at the long walnut desk and to her work at the side of my grandmother's bed. She kept her hand at the side of my jaw. The Reverend looked at the stove. Mrs. Bridie looked at the rose. Mr. Eastman's clerk looked at the page of the register because he had been brought up well. We turned. We walked back down the aisle of the small stone chapel at 12:05 on the first Wednesday of March. Sloane opened the door. The cold winter sun was through it. The 50 yards back to the house were the 50 yards back to the house. We stopped at the back step. We turned. We both looked up together at the long window on the south side of the house. My grandmother was at the window. She had her 2 pillows up against it. She had her grandmother Margaret's emerald on the smallest finger of her right hand. She had her grandfather Walter's band on her left. She was looking down at us. She did not wave. She did not need to. The cold rose garden air was between us. We stood at the back step for a count of 14, and we looked at her, and she looked at us. And then she set her right hand against her own heart for one breath, the way she had set her own hand against her own heart at her wedding in 1976. And she nodded once, and she turned her face slightly to the side, and she closed her eyes. Mrs. Bridie came up the path behind us. Mrs. Bridie said, in the voice she had used for 41 years on the kitchen step, "Lunch is at 1. The bread is on the table. Come in." We came in. My grandmother lived 7 weeks. She died on the second Sunday of April, in the small bedroom on the south side, with my hand on her right hand and Sloane's hand on her left, and Mrs. Bridie holding the small piece of tissue paper from the cufflink in the chair at the foot of the bed. She was 81. She had spent the last great act of her life on the granddaughter she had not asked the question of in 2015. Her last sentence to me, by my own count, which is the count I am going to use, was, "Do not let her sell the orchard." I said, "I will not, grandmother." She said, I know. The estate was reorganized across the next 3 years on the schedule Sloane had drafted in the first week of February. The inheritance bill was met on the 1st of April, the morning after she died. The orchard is in the family. The moor is in the family. The Vanessa Bell is in the small drawing room. The rose garden is the rose garden. Mrs. Bridie is the housekeeper. It is Yorkshire again now, in the long late summer light of August, 4 years after the first Wednesday of March. I am 30. I am the director of conservation at the Tate, by which I mean I have left the small back rooms, and I have a small front office and a chair on a committee, and I work from the long walnut desk in the library at Larkwood 3 days of the week, and from a small flat in Marylebone the other 4, because the small flat in Marylebone has belonged to my wife for 15 years, and I have not yet asked her to give it up. She is at the long walnut desk in the library, with the Mont Blanc in her right hand, turning slowly between her thumb and her first 2 fingers, the way she has turned it since the day she stepped out of the back of a black Bentley, with a small black case in her hand and a single low patent heel on the gravel of the drive. She's wearing my great-grandmother's small gold cufflink on the left wrist of a cream silk shirt. She is reading a letter from a Lady Furness near Hexham, who has heard that her own granddaughter is 23 and would like, in due course, to meet Sloane Devereux for tea. She looks up. She sees me at the door. She says my name. I say hers. She comes to the door. She takes my hand. She walks me into the library. The fire is at the grate. The small stove behind the desk is ticking. The cold light is on the table. She says, in a low voice that does not announce itself, "Then say it like a yes." I say, "Yes." She says, "Then say it like a yes." I say, "Yes, Sloane." She closes the door.